tunnel rat alert. Civil defense information will be broadcast at 6:40.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hello.
Y2K, how can we prepare?
Stop a few of their machines and radios. Throw them into darkness for a few hours.
We are fighting for our lives. My family must survive.
Over 5 years, 1,000 gallons of gas, air filtration, water filtration.
Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada. Streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Telegram, Rumble, and Odyssey. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim. Today is March the 16th, 2023, and this is episode 273 of the Workshop Podcast. So, how is everyone out there? It was an absolutely gorgeous Thursday today. It's the warmest day we have had yet. Got outside and got lots of shit done, so we are happy. Let's get the announcements out of the way, and then we're going to dive into tonight's show. I'm kind of excited. This is another in our ongoing disaster series where we take a look at historical disasters and see the prepping lessons we can learn from that. So, first off, Thursday. Got to remember our brother Joel at Fortress Canine. He has the Protection Dog podcast. He just released episode 138 called How to Organize Your Life for Success. Joel is a guy who will encourage you. He'll kick you in the ass verbally, but he will absolutely encourage you. And if he sees you're doing good things, he'll keep on keeping on. So give him some love. Go by, check him out. And if you do, subscribe to his podcast. Let him know you heard about him from me. Hey, Byron Roberts, good to have you. Number 2, just put out my latest review video. This one's a bit different. This is for EMP Shield. Now, the company a while back said they wanted to send me one so I could check it out. And I was trying to think, how in the world do you review something that really the only way you can review it is to destroy it? Didn't do that, spoiler alert. But I did a deep dive into the research on it, and it turns out that it's, despite the name EMP Shield, it's an incredible whole home surge protector. So anyway, did a great review, really enjoyed it. Check that video if you want. But the cool thing is, if you ever decide to pick one up, there's a coupon code below to save $50. Toolman Tim is the coupon code, or there's a link you can click directly. And there's that. And finally, guys, just over a week away, I think Nicole just had a live stream for it. Self-Reliance Festival. Wish I could be there. But the missus is leaving on a jet plane, so I have to be here to hold the fort down. So I will not be at this one, but I can do my damnedest to share the link to everyone else. So selfreliancefestival.com, March 25th and 26th, $95 for the weekend. You will get your money's worth. It's an incredible event with some of the best networking. It is turning into its own beast, and I love it. I love the extended Self-Reliance Festival community. It's incredible. So, hey, I see Mike from Snail Creek Homestead. How are you, brother? Always good to have you. So, this evening, like I said, I'm kind of excited. This has been one that I have always been intrigued with. I don't know what it is about blackouts in big cities. I don't know if it's a fear or what, but I'll tell you here in a minute where the inspiration for this show kind of came from, I guess, would be the way to put it. But like I said, I always kind of dug the idea of being in a big city, as scary as it might be during a major blackout like this. But where my interest in this exact event came from, way back when, I don't know if you guys know this, but in Canada, we do have some original films made there on occasion. It doesn't happen too often, but there was a 1978 Canadian film. It was called Blackout, and I saw it way too young, probably when I was 8, 9 years old. Who knows exactly, but I was just little. And it was about, I want to say it was probably a Sunday afternoon or a Saturday night on CBS or ABC, one of those two channels they were either channel 3 or channel 4 way down on the dial. And they always used to play these movies. They'd be edited for TV, but it was this creepy film with 4 criminals who escape during a prison transport, and they break into a New York City apartment complex while the power's out, and they go around and do exactly what you would think deranged, crazy killers on the loose would do. Scared me pretty bad, and I always thought it was just a fictionalized story. Now, it is, but it was loosely based on this 1977 blackout in New York City. We got Josh, Renegade Butcher, good to have you. Chuck Peoples, good to have you as well. Always love to see you guys. So the tagline for that movie, if you think it wasn't cheesy enough, was one citywide blackout, deranged killers on the loose, 12 hours of sheer terror. So if that couldn't have scared, 9 or 10-year-old Tim, I don't know what would. But so that is where the deep down, deep-seated need to scare myself with this one. But it is. It's a cool event. We're going to do what we did with the same as we did with the Buffalo Blizzard. So if you were here for that one, we're going to kind of outline the timeline of what happened. We're going to talk about the key events, what caused it. We're going to dig into some pretty cool individual stories, which took a little more digging tonight because, let's see, I didn't do the math, but what is that, 46 years ago. So it's 46 years ago. So the people who were even in their teens or in their 60s, they're senior citizens now. So we're going to dive into some of their cool stories. And then the best part, we're going to pull out 10 prepping lessons from the whole bunch. And Garden Girl 84 just dropped on to say, so many children were born 9 months later. Yeah, I think you are right. So here we go. If you guys ever do this, it's kind of fun. Sometimes on Twitter, you can see these videos of what celebrities do. But when you type in a certain phrase into Google, it's fun to see what auto completes after it. So if you type in Blackout New York City into Google, you get 2003, 1965, and 1977. And then the fourth one is Blackout 1977 New York City. So out of the four, two of them are the crazy 1977 blackout. Now, if you listen to my History of Modern Preparedness series, you've already heard a bit about the 65 blackout. It was a nothing burger. I mean, it was a big deal. Don't get me wrong. But it was a nothing burger in as much that the city didn't lose its collective ever-loving shit and go absolutely bonkers. Spoiler alert, they do the opposite in 1977. So it was kind of neat to see that. So let's break down the high points right quick. So it only lasted 25 hours. So for those who are mathly challenged, that's 1 hour more than a full day. It started in the evening. We'll talk about that. It began as just a single crack of thunder and lightning. And it basically was a repeat of 12 years previous of 1965. It was one of those, Jason said, "Sup, my second favorite snowbird." I think I know who your first favorite is, but no, I appreciate you. Good to have you, Jason. Always good to have you. I'll see you before too long, for sure. So it was the only major blackout that was ever contained to just New York City. The 1965 one went, I think, if I remember correctly, it kind of went up and then inland a bit. The 2003 blackout, if you guys, Renegade said that's just over 2.5 days. Yes, your math is really good tonight, Josh. So you made me chuckle while we were going here. So that makes my day. Yeah. And if you remember the 2003 blackout, it was everywhere except in Nova Scotia where I was. We heard about it, but we didn't have to deal with it. So this was the only one that was contained right in the New York City area. So let's do a timeline breakdown. In case you haven't seen this, you can do some Googling. There's some really cool pictures. It's surprising how much news footage is out there. There's entire hour-long replays of the 1977 news stories regarding it. But so around 8:34 Eastern Time, July 13th, a lightning strike hits a substation on the Hudson River. It trips two circuit breakers, which would allow the power from the Indian Point nuclear plant to transmit. However, there was a loose nut on one of the connections, and it wouldn't allow it to automatically reset. So, if you can wonder if a 20-cent nut can cause a power outage for 10 million people, the answer is it probably can. So if you're getting deja vu all over again, The 1965 power outage was the exact same thing. It started with one little thing, and then it snowballed because the system wasn't prepared for it. Now, the system did what it's supposed to do, but at 8:45, a second lightning strike, they say lightning doesn't strike twice, or no, yeah, you know how it is. Just it struck, it hit two high-tension transmission lines. They overloaded both those lines. So Con Ed is the local what they call the power company in New York City. They attempted to start a backup generator. However, they hit the button, and when they called to the office to say, hey, we're getting ready to start this backup generator, is there somebody there who can help? Nobody answered the phone. So you have a loose nut, and then you have a missing nut. And then at 8:55, about 30 minutes after it all started, a third lightning strike hits another substation in Yonkers. That name always cracks me up. Took out two more critical power lines. This forced the power company to reduce power at one of the generators that they were using, and it made issues worse. They sent out a telegram or a phone call. It was kind of muddy, and they said, turn back the power. The guy who heard that thought they meant voltage. What they actually meant was wattage. He turned back the voltage too low, and it created another cascading effect. At 9:15, while all this was happening, the power company is attempting to do some strategic disconnects that they thought would allow them to keep everything going. But by 9:20, the last substation in Leeds, New York, overheated because it was being used too much and shut down. At 9:20, the Long Island Lightning Company, so that was, Long Island, connected. They tried to open up some lines and shed some power, but instead it just overloaded the underpowered lines at that point. At 9:30, Con Ed couldn't manually drop enough customers with their connections. And so at that point, New Jersey tripped. So basically, there's a bunch of fail-safes in place back in the 70s that if the power is either if the voltage is too high, too low, things start shutting down, just like the 65 power outage. Kind of interesting. So those fail-safes built into the power grid would eventually isolate the entire city of New York that evening and tried to protect itself from overloaded lines and serious damage. A lot of these big power outages, this is what happens. You have these fail-safes built in to protect themselves from these bad scenarios, but it ends up causing some issues. So finally, by 9:27, only 52 minutes after the initial lightning strike, the largest power station, the largest power generator in New York City, it's called the Ravenswood Generating Unit number 3. Sounds like some secret government base. It finally failed, shut down power for the entire city, minus 2 or 3 little neighborhoods in Queens. So you might say, well, okay, it's just a power outage. Well, I would have loved to say it was just a power outage, but it was a power outage in the 70s in New York City during a heat wave with a serial killer on the loose during some of the darkest economic times ever seen by that city. So you can just imagine the craziness that then starts out. Robin says, my husband repairs those massive breakers for power companies. Not back then, though. No, he'd have probably been, in 77, maybe a baby. It wouldn't be safe to have a baby up in the power lines, although some people might try it. So here's the craziness, guys. 1,600 stores were damaged due to looting. Over 1,000 fires were responded to. Many of them were multiple alarm fires. Almost 4,000 people were arrested. The cost in 1977 dollars was $300 million, well over $1 billion in today's. Now, according to this, there was only a single murder, and it was to an up-and-coming wannabe mobster. So somebody decided to use the cover of dark to take him out. Rather interesting. We got somebody trying to sell us something over on Twitch. So there we are. Okay. So from there, let's talk about some of the ins and the outs, and we're going to get into some of the craziness that happened, some of the stories. Robin said they were in 7th grade. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how these power guys can do it. It's crazy. A lot of us are hunkering down, just, holding down the fort when the power goes out, and these guys are going out in the shittiest weather, climbing poles and doing some of the most insane stuff. They get props from me, man, I'll tell you. So here we go. During this power outage, it was kind of cool. The Cubs were playing the Mets at the moment. So this is the first kind of instance I want you guys to picture. If you've ever been to either a baseball game, I've never been to a professional baseball game, but I've been to lots of hockey games. There they are sitting at the bottom of the sixth inning. It was a small crowd because it was 97 degrees Fahrenheit and humid. 15,000 were at the game, which was small for a Mets game in the 70s. At 9:31, third baseman Larry Randall stepped up to the plate. Ray Burris was about to throw the pitch. And boom, the lights went off. Imagine standing there, 15,000 people watching you, and all of a sudden the lights go out. So an emergency generator was turned on. They did have emergency power in 77, which was kind of cool. It provided just enough electricity for the hallways and ramps to have power, just emergency lighting. I thought this was funny. I found this on a History of Baseball website. They said concession stands were immediately closed to diffuse the potentially dangerous parlay of heat, darkness, and beer on the orders of the Mets VP. Now, nothing personal against New Yorkers, but can you imagine 97 degrees Fahrenheit, 15,000 people, pure darkness, the New York attitude, and a whole shit ton of beer? That would not have been a great idea. Look up, I believe it was the Milwaukee Brewers had a free beer night one night, and it ended up in a riot. So Renegade Butcher says, just goes to show letting your nuts loose can have unintended consequences. Yes, yeah, one nut didn't show up for his job and the other one was loose on the job. So there you go. So here, I love that. I get this mental picture of, that kind of, there's something really neat about the 70s and 80s New York City. It always looked dirty and hot and gross and full of crime and, spray painting tags everywhere. So with that, they canceled the game for the time being. The Cubs had to return to their hotel, the Waldorf Astoria. Sounds like a fancy hotel. By bus, like they did back then, and they still do. The hotel provided them with candles to climb to their rooms on the 16th floor. Wasn't that nice of them? Burris, the pitcher, his candle blew out just as he reached the floor on the 16th and had to basically wander down the hallway, touching the halls, touching the doors until he got to his door. There wasn't any iPhones with built-in flashlights back in that day. Burris said without the air conditioning working, didn't get much sleep. Without lighting, the long trek to the ground floor with luggage had to be completed the following morning because they were due for a doubleheader in Philadelphia that night. So they get back to their hotel. They're like, well, sorry, suckers. We don't have any. I'm sure this is because they were the road team, of course. But sorry, suckers. You're on the 15th floor. Elevators aren't working. Here's a candle. Hope it helps. And then the next morning, guess who gets to bring all their luggage down? You'd want to be in good shape. So why did it get so bad? So like I said, why did it end up being one of those scenarios? It was a perfect storm. Now, if you're going to guess that the first prepping lesson we're going to talk about at the end of this is get out of the city, you're probably correct on this, but I digress. So what was going on in New York City at the time that made this power outage so damn bad? Well, here's the crazy thing. Let's talk about it. Because there's not just a single reason. There was a confluence of a bunch of different things that made New York the cesspool that it was in the 70s and the 80s. I'm a big horror movie fan. If you've ever watched the Friday the 13th movies, Michael Myers, I think it's number 8. Michael Myers goes, Jason Takes Manhattan. It's really Jason spends the entire time riding on a boat on a fictional river from New Jersey to New York and spends 10 minutes in New York City. But those 10 minutes are glorious 1980s New York City. And this is what I picture it as. So, like I said, ton of issues going on. There wasn't one that made New York this kind of tinderbox. It was ready to explode. It was like a whole city just needed to get all of this anxiety and stress off their collective shoulders. And so they thought, hey, I got a great idea. Let's go out and loot. I read interviews with rappers who went out and stole their first scratching table. I read things where they arrested kids under the age of 10 in jewelry stores, just crazy stuff. But people were they just needed or wanted or felt the need to go absolutely bonkers. So here's something. The first reason that we can blame, no, not really, but one of the causes of this craziness was the interstate system. I'm going to take a sip of my drink while you guys think why the hell that might be. So here's the thing. When the interstate system started getting developed in the 40s through to the 60s, what did it do? Well, all of a sudden, all these people who lived right in the city and were making really good money are like, hey, honey, guess what? We can move out of the city to the burbs. I can still make lots of money, but we don't have to deal with the hustle and the bustle of the city. So all of these upwardly mobile people decided, guess what we're going to do? We're going to move to the suburbs. So who did that leave behind? The downwardly non-mobile people, the people who were, either on welfare or impoverished or whatever. They couldn't get the heck out of the city. And so crime rates in that group demographic tend to be slightly higher. That was one reason. So Robin says, hot town, summer in the city, back of my neck, getting dirty and gritty. Now that song is going to be in my head all night. And I did a poor job of trying to sing it. So there you go. So that was the first thing. People left the city in a very high concentration in the 20 years leading up to the 70s. They're like, let's get out of Dodge. We're going to make all our money, but we're going to live out there. And we're going to leave all the ne'er-do-wells in the city to do as they will. The civil rights movement had just happened, so that meant you had a ton of racial integration. You say, is that a bad thing? No, it wasn't at all. But here's the thing. You have a whole bunch of people of all mixed ethnic backgrounds moving to New York City. But you still have a whole bunch of people who have old-fashioned beliefs or who have grown up in a certain racial makeup of a neighborhood. And that created a ton of racial tension in the 70s in New York City. The optimism of the 60s, the free love, all of that. So the hippies who were fighting the man and against the Vietnam War, well, eventually they got wore out or grew up a bit, and that optimism and protesting ended up turning into a sense of hopelessness into the 70s. And that's kind of what happened. The crack epidemic, even though cocaine was the big drug of the 70s and into the 80s, crack was starting to take over the cities as well. Cheap drugs, organized crime, that was another bit. And then here's the crazy thing, and we're going to talk about this a little bit. And this is probably the match that, I'm going to say the power outage was the match that lit the explosion. But the thing that made it the powder keg it was the fact that New York City was dealing with the Son of Sam. So you can see all this. You've got racial tensions. You've got an outward migration of the upwardly mobile. You have a huge drug problem. You have financial difficulties, and you have a generation that is disillusioned. All of that. And then New York City has now been dealing with an incredibly scary serial-ish killer who was taunting. Well, let's get into it. So, July 1976, first shooting. Somebody, they didn't know who it was, snuck up on two people who were walking, got down on one knee, and shot them both in cold blood after dark. Nobody knew what happened. It was relatively unreported. It was just another story from New York City. August, September, October, 3 months later, October 1976, two people were in a car. Someone snuck up on them and randomly shot them both. That's incident number 2. They both survived. November, so 1 month later, getting a little faster, shot 2 teenagers outside their entranceway, injuring one and paralyzing another. So hadn't killed anyone yet, but that's 3. We're starting to see a pattern. Letty says, sounds like Chicago. Unfortunately, I think you are 100% correct there, Letty Lou. So, November, shot 2 teenagers outside their entrance. January, 2 months later, shot and killed one. This was the first murder. Injured another while they were sitting in their car a young couple doing what young couples do at 3 o'clock in the morning after they went to watch Rocky. Imagine Rocky being the last movie you ever get to see before you're shot. So here's a couple of quotes from the newspaper. A young Wall Street worker from Queens was shot to death early yesterday for no apparent reason while sitting with her companion in a parked car on a quiet Forest Hill street waiting for the engine to warm up, the police said. This was how the media was treating it at this point. They got a hold of it. They're starting to run with it. And of course, what do media do? They're like, ooh, look at that little fire there. It sounds really scary. I wonder if I come up behind it with a bellows and blew on it, if that would help things, because that's what they did. So, the next one, this was from the police. This was January 1977. So we're talking 6 months before this massive power outage. They said, we are checking into the possibility that cases with similar circumstances may have occurred in this borough or other boroughs over the past year or so, and whether there are any connections between these possibly similar cases, like this one. That is the first time that the police say, hey, holy shit, we've had 4 random shootings. The MO is the same, 45 caliber gun every single time. We think we have a serial shooter and who is turning out to be a crazy killer. Okay, 2 months later, March 8th, a college student was shot in the head and killed on her way home. March 10th, police say the previous 2 shootings were linked to the same 45 caliber Bulldog revolver that was involved. Turns out that they weren't 100% sure, but they were confident enough that all of these crimes were linked that they decided to come out and say, guess what? We know what's going on. We're pretty sure we have a serial killer / shooter on their hands. Now, at this point, every single day, the headlines were, they didn't have a name for him yet. At the time, they were calling him the 44 caliber killer. So you can imagine every morning you go down to the newsstand and what's in big, bold type? Another shooting, or police are useless, or whatever it is. Again, the media is there standing behind it, blowing on the flame, saying, guess what? Let's get going. If you're not scared, you should be. That's what they said. Not really, but that's what they think. April 2nd. April, 2 more people were shot and killed while sitting in a car in the Bronx. There we go. So at this point, we're at April, May, June, July, 3 months before this massive power outage that happens. This is the point where it gets friggin' hairy. He leaves a letter and refers to himself as the son of Sam. Now, I'm going to throw this little piece of trivia in there for you. If you didn't know how the son of Sam got his name, it's simple, you might ask. Well, guess what? The guy who was the son of Sam had a neighbor whose name was Sam, and he had a German shepherd who supposedly talked to him and told him that he needed to kill people. So the son of Sam was the German shepherd who was a demon who told this dude to up and kill all these people. So he refers to himself in his letter to the police, taunting, saying, I'm the son of Sam. Here it is. I'm deeply hurt by you calling me a woman hater. He spelled it wrong. I am not, but I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I am a little brat. When Father Sam gets drunk, he gets mean. He beats his family. Sometimes he ties me up to the back of the house. Other times he locks me in the garage. Sam loves to drink blood. Go out and kill, commands Father Sam. So they get this creepy. Renegade Butcher says that is the reason why you don't listen to police dogs. Exactly. That perfect. Yes, because they're satanic agents who tell people to go out on crime sprees. Makes sense. So here we go. This is the last big event. June 26, 1977, only 17 days before this massive blackout, 2 more people were sitting in a parked car. Both were shot. Both were lucky enough to survive. So here's what you have. You have a serial killer who has been terrorizing the entire city for a year. He's ramping up his crime spree, and now he's been leaving letters for the police and for the press. You have the press who have been fanning these flames 24/7, 17 days before you have yet another event where this crazy, insane guy says, I'm going to get you. And to top all that off, the day the power outage happened was the start of one of the nastiest heat waves that New York City had where they saw multiple days above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That day of the power outage was 97 degrees. And if you don't know, heat drives people to do absolutely stupid things. Garden Girl 84 says he eventually admitted that he made up the story about the dog talking to him. Well, good for him. I don't know if that makes him more crazy or less crazy. Either way, it makes him one crazy bastard. So, you've got this city that is on edge, thinking, holy crap, we got a serial killer coming after us. We've got a drug infestation. We've had a mass exodus from the urban lifestyle. We've got a downtrodden economy. And all of a sudden, they're like, wow, guess what's going to happen? Well, they don't know this, of course, but the mayor goes on and absolutely lambastes Con Ed because, remember, this was only 12 years after the major 1965 power outage. Con Ed came out and said, hey guys, that's never going to happen again. Well, we know that wasn't true, right? They said, we have put safeguards and fail-safes into the system that we will never have a cascading power outage that will affect the entire city ever again. Well, sorry to tell you, but it has happened on multiple occasions. How do you say that? I mean, they came out and said, hey, it's an act of God. Well, you said that you were good. So when it all goes to hell, the city goes absolutely nuts. So what I did was I went through and I found some crazy stories. Well, just personal reflections on what happened. I got a cop, I got an author, I got a teenager, a few different things to give you kind of a feel for what was going on. And then we're going to kind of zoom back a bit and talk about the crazy stuff that happened. And maybe we'll play the game of what would you do if you were in 1977 New York? And maybe what would you do if you were in 2023 New York? And I would say it might be a nice place to visit, but it sure as hell wouldn't be a nice place to live. Renegade says he didn't have to make it up to be crazy. No, he did not. All right. So the first story I got is from a guy named Wilton. At the time, he was a 33-year-old cop. He was sitting at home in his beige-colored armchair. Why he included that piece of information, I'll have no idea. Power goes out. He's like, well, that's not good for I believe it was a Thursday evening. He runs to the roof and sees, ooh, shit. The power is out absolutely everywhere. So he says, guess what, honey? I love you, but I got to go to work because I guess that's what a good cop does. So he gets to work. He says, Captain, what do we do? Here's where the story goes. He says, at that moment, a guy comes flying through the door. He says, hey, I own such and such a furniture store on Broadway. He says, they're walking away with the building, the furniture, everything in it. They're just looting it. So he said the captain quickly issues a command for him and the other officers to get the hell up and lock up everything that moves. In other words, get out there and start making some arrests. So there's a group, I think he said it was 14 cops. I didn't write that part down, but he says, as we turned onto Broadway, and as you know, Broadway, now in the 70s, Broadway, I believe, is part of Times Square, and that was the seedy end of the city. Now it's the touristy end of the city. As they turn onto Broadway, he said they stopped dead. Now just picture this. You got a group of about 14 cops walking out onto Broadway Street. He said there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people ripping off these stores. He said 2 people carrying a goddamn coach right down the middle of Broadway. People with TVs under their arms, everything. Now, I got to say, if you can carry a TV under your arm in 1977, you're a strong dude. You remember those? Even the little ones weren't light. So yeah, somebody was doing it. He said people were shamelessly pulled up to the front of furniture stores in trucks and loaded up whatever they could fit. He said bullets rained from the rooftops. The sound of hysteria cackled all around. Just picture that. I don't know. It would be scary. You're out in what was, you're at home, probably having a beer. You got your feet up, might be listening to the Mets and Cubs on the radio. And all of a sudden the power goes out. And 10 minutes later, you're on Broadway staring down a crowd of probably 1,000 people who are hyped up on goofballs, in the words of Chief Wiggum. And there you are. What do you do? What would you guys do? I don't know. I don't know what I would do. But here's his illustration. He said they were feeding like bluefish in a feeding frenzy. He said, the strongest feeling I had was one of disbelief. A police captain in the nearby 81st precinct would say later, according to that report. The cop goes back to say, I've seen looting before, but this was total devastation, smashing and burning. This reminds me of the LA riots, and we're definitely going to be doing a deep dive into the LA riots down the road, because that was probably the first event that I remember as a kid. Letty Lou says, good luck finding a sergeant or a lieutenant to back you up. I agree. So he said, I've seen looting like this, but it was total devastation, smashing and burning. He said, this is kind of sad, and this gives you a bit of the mindset, but he said, for many of the impoverished local residents, it was as if the holidays had come early. Now, this is where it gets kind of scary. He says, marauding bands of disgruntled residents, men, women, and children, flooded the streets and began destroying everything in their paths, one grocery store and one clothing shop at a time. Sketzer, that's the cop that's giving this story, he said he made sure to stay close to his patrol car. I mean, if you need to be out in a war zone like that, you want to have a bastion of safety. You want to have a fortress you can get back in, or a way of egress. And I guess that's probably what he was doing, and rightfully so. My ass would be staying close to the cop car as well. Here's what he said. He said, we definitely would have gotten our asses kicked if that crowd had turned and said, let's go get the cops. Interesting, hey? Absolutely. So you got that poor cop who is out there with his people looting. Like, you know what? I was just going to say it, and I read Letty's comment here. She said, based on the peaceful protests of recent years, not much has changed. Unfortunately, very true. Isn't it? Well, I know the quotes come from everywhere, but I've heard Jack Spirko say it a lot of times. Don't go to, stupid places and do stupid things with stupid people. Well, this basically covers all three of those. Don't put yourself in a scenario where the shit can go sideways really bad. Now, this cop, that was his job. He went there. He obviously survived because he was telling this story as a 70-some-year-old. Rather interesting. Scary as shit. But I just can't imagine going through it. Here's another one here. This was an author named Arthur. Arthur Nearsian. That's what we're going to call him. He was 18 years old at the time the blackout happened. Now, I want you to hear this story. This one's sad and whatever. But so he was at his apartment. He was in the shower when the power went out. Anybody ever been in the shower when the power's gone out? It's happened to me before when the lights go out. Usually it's during the day, though, so it's not too bad. But I can imagine. He said, it was 9:30, so it was pretty dark in his apartment building, so he had to fumble around and try to find some clothes. He said as the power went out, he figured that his girlfriend or whatever at the time hadn't paid the power bill. Then he looks outside and realizes, holy shit, the entire city has gone black. That would scare me half to death. And all he could think about was his father at his apartment, who was 40 years old and who is currently in the late stages of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Can you imagine this? So he's across town. He's getting out of a shower. His brother calls and says, hey, you need to get here. We need to get dad to the hospital. His father's 40 years old, on a respirator, at home, living on the 8th floor of an apartment building. So, like a good son, he rushes over. He meets up with his brother. They go up the 8 floors. They check on his dad. He's not in good shape. He's in a hospital bed. So they then bring the father out into the hallway and carry him in his bed down 8 floors of stairs in pitch black as they tell the story, putting their hands on the walls to make sure they get down. And then they pushed him the multiple blocks it was to the nearest hospital that had a working generator. They were there for a week. They saved their dad for the short term. The guy who told the story, who was 18, went home finally after 7 days, left his father at the hospital, finally got a solid night's sleep, came back to the hospital to find out his father had passed away. I can't even imagine. What would you, that garden girl says, God bless him. What would you even do? I mean, this is 1977, right? So what would you have on? Everything used more power back then. So what would you even have on hand to be able to do that? I mean, maybe hand pumping. I'm not sure, but we're going to deal with that a little bit. Okay, so this next one was pretty cool. This was Jacques D. I don't think he was French, but the name was Jacques and his last initial was D. He was 20 years old at the time, and he told this story to Medium magazine. So he was heading to the World Trade Center, which had just recently been opened, actually. I didn't check the exact date, but I know they were opened in the 70s at some point. He was heading to the World Trade Center to pick up his girlfriend. His girlfriend and her family were eating in the restaurant at the top of the tower. Can you imagine? I was at the top of the World Trade Centers many years ago. I believe it was 110 stories up. The restaurant was one down. I want to say it was, I can't remember the name of the restaurant, but the whole idea was you're eating a meal at the top of the friggin' city. As him and a friend of his pull up to the World Trade Center, the lights go out, and he notices the whole city's dark. The World Trade Center still has a bit of power, but the lights are going a bit dim. And then all of a sudden, they go out. So what goes through this 20-year-old's mind at that time? He says, well, the first thing he knew was that, yes, his girlfriend and her family were at the top of the World Trade Center. But he thought, what exactly can I do? I know she's with her family and they're safe up there for the time being. It's just a power outage. So he had to make the split second decision. Well, do I try to climb up 110 stories to the roof and make sure she's okay? Or do I accept that she's with her family, she's okay, and he needs to get the hell home? Because all of a sudden his brain's going, wow, it's going to be a madhouse out there. So he decided, he left his buddy John and he went on foot, because he said almost instantly when the power went out, pure gridlock. I never even talked about that in any of my notes. I forgot to, but he mentioned it. Can you imagine being in a city and all of a sudden all the fucking power, all the signal lights just go out like that? Whew. Talk about gridlock. So he said, as I walk through Tribeca, this is a really cool story, actually, guys. He says, as I walk through Tribeca, he said, a few guys started to hassle me. So what does he do? He takes stock of what he has on hand. He says, all I had on me to double as weapons were some nail cutters, a fresh pack of smokes, and a lighter. So I lit the cigarette. And when one of the guys lunged toward me, I smashed the lit cigarette right in his eye, and I ran away, quickly ducking into an alley and disappearing. I thought that was pretty smart. You can tell this kid was street smart at the time. What's the next move he does? He took some large bills. He took all of the large bills and his personal identification out of his wallet, stuffed them into his underpants. I thought that was pretty cool. Hey, Nate Lemaster, good to have you. Several blocks later, he knew his city. He was mugged by a group of thugs on the street. One of them slugged him in the face, and they stole his wallet, and all they got was 3 $1 bills. They got his leather wallet, but all they got was $3. The kid was smart. He said, finally, I reached my apartment building only to find that our security guy and our doorman had left. Another lesson that I didn't put in my notes, but don't rely on security or people holding down the fort when the shit hits the fan, right? Yeah. So, Mike, you are right. Snail Creek Homestead says, never live somewhere if the lights go out that you're in trouble. You correct. 100%. I agree. I couldn't imagine. So, gets to the apartment. Security guy and the doorman have left. Non-residents, he said, were running into the building, up and down the stairs. He said, I waited for a few of them to leave. I put my lighter up to the fire alarm and set it off. I got those who didn't belong there out of the stairwell, ushering them out, saying, hey, it's on fire, get out. He locked all the doors on the main floor and told alarmed residents in the building what I had done to keep our building safe. We all returned to our apartments. I watched the chaos from my window, and man, was it wild. That is one of the craziest stories. It almost sounds like the guy was tooting his own horn just a little bit. But the dude was a survivor, from taking stock of what was in his pockets, to hiding his valuables, to fighting back, to flighting when he needed to setting off a fire alarm when he needed to get the people out that he knew if he tried to physically interact with them, he would be hurt. I thought it was wild. And the worst of it was his friend that he left at the World Trade Center decided to stick around for his girlfriend to get down. Eventually they got backup power in, And 3 days later, his girlfriend left him for his friend. So there you go. But you know what? He made the choice. He knew she was safe. He said, I need to get off the streets and get home to make sure everything's all right. What do they say? That action beats inaction every single time. And that's what he did. He made a choice. He followed through and he made it the hell home. I believe this is the final story I have. This one was really cool. I could have turned this into a 2-part episode because there's so many neat stories when you start digging in. This guy's David Alvarez. He writes for the Society of American Baseball Research, known as SABR. And if you've ever heard the term sabermetrics, probably most of you haven't because I'm a baseball geek. It's the modern way they break down a lot of the incredible baseball stats. Anyway, he's a writer for them. He tells the story about being at the baseball game. He said, I traveled to that game that day by the subway. He was sitting in the upper deck when the blackout occurred. He said, I looked west to where the Manhattan skyline should be, where it's normally visible, and to my astonishment, I didn't see a thing. He said that really showed the scope of how big this friggin' blackout was. He said, now, I forget how old he was. I think he was 15 or 16 at the time. I immediately panicked. He said, my first thoughts were, how the hell would I get back to Manhattan? Now, here's the thing. Becky's taking a trip to England in the next little while, and I've thought about that a lot. If something ever happened, how the hell do I get her back stateside or North American side, right? I'm not sure about that. But what I have done is worked with her on making sure all of her pertinent passports and driver's licenses are backed up and updated and in triplicate, and also to know where the Canadian embassy is in both England and France. You can only do what you can do, but you just make a contingency plan. That's what I would do if I was maybe not a 15-year-old, but if I was going to a baseball game across the city, and I just play those games like, how the hell do I get back? So he said, I panicked. First thought was, how the hell do I get home? He said, I got a ride back to Upper Manhattan and walked from the highway to street level at 178th Street, where the looting was going crazy. He said, I had to take 2 free buses. So the buses were all running, but province side. Yes, good point, Renegade. He said province side instead of stateside. Said he took 2 free buses that got me to within 15 blocks of my apartment. I then walked down, and I thought this was a cool little blurb or whatever. He walked down the middle of Lexington Avenue to my building, went up the stairwell with the superintendent, felt my way to the apartment, which was the most distant unit from the elevator. What I liked was that little piece about walking down the middle of the road. So here's the thing. You've probably, at this point, you've got gridlock and you have to travel. So you've got basically one of 2 options, out in the open or in the shadows. And when there's a lot of people around, I'm going to guess out in the open, like he picked, was the best option. So straight down the meridian of the road with cars on either side. At least what that does is hopefully limit the blind sides where people can be standing to mug you or grab you, because that way you're not passing in front of an alley where somebody can just jump out and mug you. So I thought that was a cool little snippet of what he did. So let's talk about, I hauled out 10. If you guys thought of any more, I would love to hear about them. Letty Lou, I like this. Letty shared this story before. She said, I used to make plans on how to walk out of Chicago to home when I worked downtown. I had 4 different routes to take, avoiding the most likely ways. That's a great mental exercise. Now, some normies or whatever you want to call it, non-prepper types might say, well, shit, you guys live your entire life in fear. Why in the hell would you do that? That's stupid. Well, to be honest, to ask Letty, how much time does it actually take and how much mental energy does it take to make those plans? Not nearly as much as what most people think. And, if some Yahoo can stand by the water cooler and talk about whatever happened on Big Brother or Survivor last night, well, then I think it's fair game for us to make a few mental plans in our brain of how to get out of Dodge just in case the shit hits the fan. How many prepper cliches can I throw into one sentence? Because I think I did it right there. So yeah, that's what when I travel to Tennessee, I absolutely think about, I have plans upon plans. I think about how would I get back to Canada if I need to. I also think how would we egress Canada and get to Tennessee if we need to? I have a route on a map planned out that would get us down there. It would take us a little longer, but it would keep us out of the major metropolitan areas. It's not perfect, but it helps. Letty Lou says, mental exercise. Then, if the shit hits the fan, I can quickly assess and go. No analysis paralysis. Exactly. That's the thing. I've heard this said. I heard it said at Tactical Response. I believe Ed from Iridium said it. I think even Chuck said it. They said, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your lowest level or your highest level of training. And that goes for mental exercises as well. If we need to egress from some crazy area, if we've never made a plan before, there's a good chance you're going to make some shitty decisions. So why not make it a mental exercise, some sort of, play scenario where you're like, hey, if I ever need to get out of here, where's everybody else going to be going? And where can I go that's the opposite of that? Nate says he has the same plans. It's 46 miles. Absolutely. Garden Girl says, my husband travels a lot for work. We often discuss what we will do if something happens while he's gone. Becky and I have been talking about that. And I never let it overtake my entire mental processes, but I've talked about, I'm going to be in Tennessee for 7 weeks roughly in September, October. That's a long time. That's, what is that? Almost 2 months. That's a long time to be away from home. So it's good to have plans on both ends, right? Letty says, always have multiple routes planned out for traveling and from Illinois. And Nate says isn't just Illinois, it's all large cities. Yes, absolutely. And Letty says, I learned to do this mentally when I worked loss prevention. Lots of talking through shoplifting apprehension scenarios so I wouldn't freeze. Yeah, that works. And it's crazy. Where did I hear this story? If you guys have heard it already, stop me. Well, you can't, so I'm going to tell it to you. But it was about a Vietnam prisoner of war who hadn't golfed. Yeah, and this was in the situational awareness book I'm reading. And the guy loved to golf, and he ended up visualizing playing the perfect round of golf every day while he was in the Vietnam prisoner of war camps for like 7 years. He comes home, he goes golfing, and he golfs something like 10 strokes better than he had ever golfed in his life from passing the time visualizing these golf strokes. How crazy is that? So there you go. If that doesn't illustrate the power of visualization, I don't know what does. So lesson 1, get the hell out of the city. I repeat it, get the hell out of the city, get the hell out of the city. If you want to live in a city, that's okay. That's not my cup of tea. But I can't imagine, hey, gunfighter concealment, great to have you again. I can't imagine what it would be like living in modern New York City with all the COVID craziness that went on. That would just blow my mind. But beyond that, can you imagine in 1977, and again, maybe it's the frog in the boiling pot analogy, I don't know, but to see all the shit that's going down all around you and think, this is a pretty good place to bring up my kids. I think I'll stay. Nate says, have an analog radio and know the frequencies for all the local fire departments. Most PD is encrypted, but fire departments in the clear. Not a bad idea at all. And he didn't even say the word ham radio, so we're doing good there, guys. I'll take a drink anyway. So yeah, I would say the best plan for getting out of a city during a power outage would be not to live there to begin with. But again, you can say, well, but Tim. It's okay. I understand. Not everybody can do it. Sometimes things just don't work for some people. Cool. I get it. Number 2, stay home inside if you can. Having some preps would help. A lot of these, the absolute worst case, now, if a bunch of looters came along and lit your apartment building on fire, well, okay, that's crazy. But there was 1,000 fires. How many tens of thousands of buildings were there in the city? So the chances of your building getting caught on fire are pretty slim. The safest place you could be was at home behind a locked door, just hanging out. That's it. If you could stay home, you had a much better chance, again, of not going to stupid places with stupid people and do stupid things. Stay at home, lock your door, eat your food. It was a 25-hour emergency that by the next day was over with. About 10 o'clock that night, the following night, the power came back on. People were ready for another night of hot times, summer in the city, but they didn't have to deal with it, at least. The fans came back on, the AC came back on. Third, this is a bit of an observation, bit of a lesson, but what would you do if you were at a live event and it went totally dark like that? My girls went just before COVID, so about 3.5 years ago, they went to an Ariana Grande concert with, so it was my four daughters, and the twins at the time were 8, maybe 9, and I thought all the time, like, you had to drive right downtown Edmonton, which is the homeless center of the city. It is just a mess. You go down there, and why they built this multi-billion-dollar arena right next to Skid Row, where you see needles and empty bottles of rubbing alcohol, I'll never know. So that first gets me worried. Then I worry about the traffic, how rammed up the traffic gets. And then I think, how the hell do they get out of there if something bad happens? So, have a plan. When you go into a live event, look around. Obviously your seats are where your seats are. If you have an aisle seat, you're better off, but stay in your seat if you can while everybody else tries to get out. Because here's the thing, if you're not the first one, there's a good chance you're going to get crushed or at least pinned up in a surge. Do you remember that nightclub fire that happened years ago? Most people died in the crush at the doors. If they'd evacuated single file and slowly, everybody would have survived, but they all jammed in and ended up getting crushed at the exit and didn't get through it. Nate says, it's not ham radio. It'll work with PD and their encrypted systems go down. I'm just busting your balls, Nate. He said, just don't click the transmit button. Gunfighter says almost all police choppers are on VHF and you can get their dispatch frequencies in the U.S. Very cool. So Mike wants to know, how was the daytime? Calm? For the most part, yes. From what I read, basically the, hell on earth kind of time was from about that 9:30 at night till 3-4 o'clock in the morning. It kept going, but by the time the morning came around, people were kind of wore out and beat down and just hot. The heat had got to them, and all the ne'er-do-wells had been like, hey, we had our fun last night, let's go home. But yeah, so all of that, those 1,400 arrests, the 1,000 fires, everything happened during that first night. By the time the sun came up, they were able to get some extra police on hand. They brought in some outside reinforcements, and most of that kind of stopped. Letty Lou said, we talked about shit hits a fan plans on the drive to LFTN last year. We would get back to Illinois and I'd head to Iowa with another gal where we would meet the husbands and kids. Absolutely. It's a fun exercise to have. Lesson 4. Now, here's the thing. Pay attention to the signs. And we all talk about having a bug out, bug in plan. But I would think having a bug out plan for the city would make sense too. They went from, there was a movie or a Broadway play made about the 65 power outage. And it was, where were you when the lights went out? And everybody, the whole idea of that city was everybody stuck together. They had fun. They came together as a community. It was like a great big small town. 12 years later, it was the complete opposite. So here's the thing. If you're living in a city in 1965 and you see the city starting to, just become a shell of what it used to be, pay attention to that and talk to your significant other and figure out, honey, what do we do? When do we pull the plug and move or get out of there? Because how can you not pay attention to those signs? And I say that and I'm like, you know what? I don't know if I would have paid attention to those signs either, but in the long run, over a 12-year period, to see a city go that far from where it was, it might be well heated to pay attention to those signs for sure. Nate says, I believe we're talking about the helicopters. So usually in 155 megahertz area, but our PD is encrypted on the P25 Motorola system called Starcom. Some PD simulcast in the clear, but not all. So, number 5, pay attention to the news, but don't pay attention to the news. Pay attention to the news, but don't live your life out of fear. That's what I would say. Because now that this doesn't particularly have to do with the power outage itself, but what it has to do with is that kind of mental climate in New York City at that time. You had the news just constantly stoking the fear of, oh, guess what? We have a crazy guy on the loose. And when it comes down to it, guys, he shot and killed something like 10, 12 people at the most. You have 12 people in a city at that time of 8 to 10 million people. So the chances of anything happening were slim, but everybody was paying attention to that 1970s serial killer fever. You had the media absolutely pushing it. So pay attention to the media, but don't let the media overwhelm you. Just say, okay, I know what's going on. Let's move on. Back then it was just pass by the newspaper stand this morning, Tim. Don't put a nickel or a dime into that machine and pull it out. And all the millennials are like, what the hell is that old man talking about? Or Gen Zs at this point. But yeah, loosely pay attention to the news, but don't pay attention to the news, if you know what I mean. Here's another one, and this was a big one. Have a way to cool yourself down. I don't know what it could be, but whether it's wet towels, if you move into an apartment and you go to look at an apartment to rent and none of the windows open, I'd say, yeah, not a good idea. I had Diane, the apartment prepper, on a while ago, and she had some great tips for living in an apartment, but I couldn't imagine intentionally, and maybe this is just, I don't know. And I know preppers live in the city. I know they do, but I could not imagine subjecting myself to living on the 12th floor of any place at that time. I just couldn't imagine. I don't know. I don't even know if I could live on the 3rd or 4th floor, because you just know stairs are going to be involved. There's always the option of getting trapped in an elevator, but have a way to at least move air around, cool yourself down, know the tricks for it, and practice ahead of time. Now, in 1977, was it harder than it is today? Yeah, I bet it was. But still, have a plan. I don't know, maybe a battery-powered fan or something like that. But you need to be able to move that air around, because when we are hot and tired and can't sleep, so you got sleep deprivation, you got nasty old heat, you already have this psychological mindset in the city, all of that creates an environment where you're going to make bad decisions. So if you can sleep, well, first off, if you can cool yourself down, it'll allow you to sleep, which will allow you to get rested, which will allow you to be clear-headed, and will allow you to make better decisions than the average citizen Joe. Number 7, have a plan for backup medical stuff and egress if you live, especially if there's a broken elevator. We had the story of the gentleman whose father had ALS at the time. What do? He was on a respirator, which I guess isn't quite the same as a ventilator, but he needed artificial air. Whether you could have got one of those, hand pump bellows or something like that, it would have not been ideal. But take a minute, make a plan, figure it out. Figure out, holy shit, if something bad really does happen, how the hell are we going to get Dad and his fold-up hospital bed down 8 stories in the dark? I'm surprised at how few people had flashlights. It's not like they didn't exist in the 70s. I mean, I can remember back to the mid-80s, and my grandmother, who was as cheap as a day was long, always had multiple flashlights around her house. She used to be able to buy them stupid disposable ones that had the built-in battery. You just threw them away when they were done. They were, I can't remember the brand on them, but they were about yay big, and they kind of, held your hand around them. And I'm sure they're not good for the environment, but she always had 5 or 6 of them around. So I was surprised at how few people told the story and said, hey, I had flashlights. So, backup illumination, never a bad thing. My brother-in-law Barrett would be very happy to hear that. So yeah, have a plan for egress, have a plan for being able to back up the power to your medical systems. Just know, hey, that's a broken elevator. I'm in trouble. Now here's the next thing. Garden Girl shared something here. Said, before we got married, we lived in an old apartment in Los Angeles. there was only a wall unit in the dining room. We would pull our mattress in there and sleep in the dining room. Yeah, see, that's the mindset. That was what Diane, the apartment prepper, talked about. She said, everybody thinks they need to heat or cool their entire space, but you don't. You only need to heat or cool the immediate space you're in, or even better, only heat or cool yourself. So exactly, if you've got an entire apartment that isn't, that the air conditioning doesn't get to, put your ass in front of the air conditioner, strip down into your birthday suit and just lay there. Yeah, I know. Don't do mental pictures. Or you can do what Homer Simpson did and put a bed sheet over the door of the fridge and pretend like it's a walk-in cooler until you kill your fridge. But that's the idea. Darkwing Dave checking in from Twitch. Good to have you, sir. So yeah, know a way to cool yourself down if you can. Have a way to power your backup systems. Now, here's the next one. If you want to be absolutely insane and live on the 13th, 14th, 15th floor, whatever, of an apartment building, your ass better stay in shape. I think that would be absolutely essential to know, and here I am saying this, but could I do it? Sure, I could do it. Do I want to? No, but my ass would probably once a month take the stairs just to see what it's like. I remember, I think about this in a lot of these post-apocalyptic movies and stuff, but in The Last of Us, Joel's in his 50s and they have to climb up 30 some stories of stairs. And he said, hey, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. You got to, slow down, because stairs are a lot of work. Think about 28 Days Later, where Brendan Gleeson and his daughter are in an apartment up on like the 20th floor. And they, what's nice about that is the chances of somebody who's antagonistic toward you showing up are slim, but your ass has to go up and down 20 sets of stairs every time, or 20 floors worth of stairs every time you want to go somewhere. So keep your ass in shape and do it. Yeah, Darkwing Dave says, or that scene in Ghostbusters where they make the climb up. Yes. Another one was, what was that HBO show? Station 9 or Station 11. And that's what they do. There's an outbreak that takes place. And the guy goes and finds his brother. I forget. Anyway, they got to climb up, and they lock themselves into the apartment for multiple weeks until the infection burns itself out. And there was another cool tip in there I saw. They went and bought like $5,000 worth of groceries, but they had to take them back across the city. And of course, everybody was inside. They had no way to carry them. They had no vehicle. So they took 8 or 10 grocery carts with bungee cords and made a little grocery cart chain. One pushed, one pulled, and in a pinch, it would work. I've always thought about that. Number 9, always have a plan to get home and a backup plan for that backup plan. As Letty said, she had 4 different plans. Because, again, if you're at a Mets game or you're across town or you're 15 blocks from home, you need to know where you're going. I remember in the oil patch when I was working, we had this young kid who was working with us, and he would always, as soon as we'd pick him up, he'd go to sleep in the truck and he wouldn't wake up until we got there. And one day, the old guy who I worked with, Alex, he's since passed away, great dude, but he had a way with words. He woke up Muhammad and he said, listen here, buddy. He said, that's the last day you fall asleep. And Mo was like, well, what does it matter? He goes, let me tell you what it matters is if something happens to me and you slept and you don't know how we get into this oil patch lease and you need to get out in a hurry to take me to the hospital, your ass isn't going to know where it was or where it went. Didn't pay attention coming in, didn't pay attention going out. That's the type of thing. Have a plan, have a backup plan, know how to get there, have a backup driver, whatever it is, but you need to know and pay attention, know the direction, know the, your bearing on a compass. On the prairies, it's easy. You always know where northeast, south, and west is. But if you live in an area where it's enclosed in the cities, you may not know. But it would be helpful to know, hey, like in my town, for instance, all the streets run north and south. All the avenues run east and west. Just little things like that. Gunfighter says, during a regular day, it's always good to pace count yourself. Yeah, it is. And that's a cool little thing. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So you know how long it's going to take you to get into a place or out of a place. Yes. I've actually got a list of, I want to call it off-grid measuring. I don't even know what to call it exactly, but I've got a list that I'm going to put together in at least a partial show. Things like using rocks to count your pace, or things like using your thumb or your hand to measure the height of a tree, using a measuring tape to measure the weight of a pig, all kinds of cool things. So thanks for mentioning that, Gunfighter. That is a good thing to know. He said, if we go to a new place, then we're going to be there for vacation or a set amount of time. I'll go to a local realtor, get a map from them. They usually have a map of the area and it's free. What a great tip. Thanks, Gunfighter. I like that one a lot. Okay, and tip, whatever prepper thing, number 10. Don't risk making the scenario or situation worse by trying to get someone from somewhere that you know is already safe. And I really respected that guy, because some people be like, oh, what a dick. He didn't stay there for his woman. Here's the deal. You're 20 years old. You're in the middle of the city. You can't get into where she is. What good is it going to do you to try to climb 110 stories? All that's going to happen is you're going to get halfway up and, be exhausted. You're going to get locked in a stairwell. There's so many things that could go absolutely wrong with that. So he did the thing that he needed to do, and he needed to get somewhere safe. And so he did it. He knew these, sometimes we're like, oh, but they need to be the knight in shining armor or the white knight or whatever and go in and save. Well, you know what? Sometimes that's just not the appropriate course of action. If you know they're safe. Now, if you think they're in harm's way, then yeah, do absolutely everything you can to handle it, But in most cases, the best option is to get the hell out of Dodge and let them stay in a safe place, because introducing yourself to it could only make it worse. So I thought that was kind of a cool travel down memory lane. I really enjoyed it. I love doing these deep dives into these just historical scenarios that have happened, that people have lived through, people have died in, and things we can absolutely dig into. Arizona Renaissance Man said, the realtors can probably recommend good restaurants and cool things to do as well. Absolutely they can. They're probably one of the most underutilized, undertapped sources of information. I've never thought about recommending talking to a local realtor for this kind of stuff. But, when you go to a place, when you're trying to either find out what people are really like or what the community's really like, it really helps to find out the down and dirty dirt. You can go on the Tourism Bureau's website and they'll tell you all the nice, fancy government-sponsored places to go. But, when I go to a place, I ask a local or something like that, like, hey, where is the best greasy spoon, hole-in-the-wall diner that I can go to get the best insert food item here, that kind of thing. And I'll absolutely bet that you could find out a ton of information from realtors. So that was our deep dive there. I actually grabbed, so if you guys have been following me, I've been doing this segment called Stranger Than Fiction. Now, I don't always throw them in, but if I find an interesting news article, sometimes I think it's time to share it. And this one caught my attention. It's not related to tonight's topic at all, but I really have been enjoying doing these Stranger Than Fiction, where we bring up these weird news stories and then we break them down real quick. So we got about 10 or 15 minutes for the regular runtime. So let's see if I can bring this up for you. I want to share this with you. We don't need the entire, doesn't matter. So let's share. And there we go. Okay, so here we go. And for those of you who haven't been here or haven't seen this before, this segment is called Stranger Than Fiction, where I grab a news article, we do a quick breakdown of it, and we talk about how it applies to the average Joe, preparedness, that kind of thing. So for Doctor Who fans, does that look familiar? Anyway, I've had this thing for robots, and this is a huge privacy thing, but here you go. So this comes from Insider. I don't know, businessinsider.com. We used to call them magazines, but they're websites, so you know how it is. It's written on March 13th. It says Lowe's, and I thought this was fun because it dives into, home improvement places, but whatever. Lowe's is testing a 400-pound egg-shaped autonomous robot to patrol parking lots at some of its stores. There he is. You guys know what? I think they're Daleks. I've never been a Doctor Who fan. I used to watch the old black and white or the 70s, really creepy as shit ones that replayed when I was in elementary school, but I never watched it a lot. But that's what people are saying these look like. So there is the future of RoboCop. I mean security. I mean loss prevention. Letty, so if you were still working, you're going to be replaced with a 400-pound egg-shaped autonomous robot. Here you go. So what's it all about? So as somebody says, it's not a villainous Dalek from Doctor Who rolling around your Lowe's parking lot. Lowe's is testing autonomous 400-pound security robots from a robotics company called Nightscope. Jesus, doesn't that sound friggin' deadly? Nightscope. Wouldn't you want to call it something like environmentally friendly butterflies or something like that? I mean, Nightscope sounds like it's one step removed from Terminator and Skynet. Anyway, so Nightscope, who makes totally friendly 400-pound egg timer shaped robots to patrol parking lots at some of its stores to enhance safety. I love the word. Okay, so here we go. Enhance safety. And if you guys know, I do not put a huge focus of this channel on the news, because when we do that, I think we lose our focus. But I also do love to dive into these odd, strange little stories once in a while because they're fun. There's enough guys out there screaming, "Chicken Little, the sky is falling." I do my best not to do that. So Letty Lou says exterminate. Garden Girl says she hates the Daleks. And Snail Creek says full auto. So here is the company doublespeak coming right up. Safety is more than a priority at Lowe's. It's a core value for our company to continue to drive safety in our stores. Select locations are receiving a new security robot as a part of a pilot project. VP of Asset Protection and Safety at Lowe's told Insider via email, this pilot is part of Lowe's continuing efforts to utilize new and innovative technologies to keep our associates and our customers safe. I don't know. I don't see it. All I see when I see things like this is overreach, overreach, overreach. And corporate doublespeak. But here, let's just look at the words that come up real quick. Right here. Part of Lowe's continuing efforts to utilize new and innovative technologies to keep people safe. That's what they love to say. So here, there is a line in here that I want to share with you. Lowe's says it began testing its Nightscope K5 robots. Could you make that sound any scarier? In February in Philadelphia. Oh boy, they're going to blow that thing up there. It's also running pilots in Washington State, North Carolina, DC, and California. Several TikTok users have seen videos in Lowe's parking lot saying they look like they're from Doctor Who. Now, here's the best part. Darkwing Dave says, remind me of the 1986 movie Chopping Mall. A group of teens get locked into a mall with rogue security robots. If you haven't seen that movie, it's dull as hell, but it's also pretty hilarious. It's all of the so bad it's good YouTube video channels I watch have watched that movie at one time or another. So here is where it gets interesting. Stacy Stevens works for Nightscope, said the robots are looking for known threats. Okay, what does that mean? That seems like a very broad term. People to whom you've issued criminal trespass warnings to, terminated employees, or domestic abusers. So how in the hell do they even know someone is a domestic abuser? So if you're a domestic abuser, does that mean you can't walk into Lowe's anymore and pick up the whatever you need for your job? I don't know. The robots are not meant to replace security guards, but to help companies with situational awareness in criminal prosecution. So if the influx of cameras and surveillance wasn't enough, a 400-pound egg-shaped robot will help security guards be better at situational awareness and prosecuting criminals. Lowe's decision to test these autonomous robots comes as retailers have been sounding the alarms about rising levels of theft. I don't know. What do you think? Still, other retailers are walking back their messaging around theft. Walgreens said the company cried too much, saying that they haven't seen much shrinkage lately. Interesting. Let's see. So the big thing I wanted to talk about real quick, and this was kind of the thing that I think right here. So they always put the scary part at the bottom, right? And the robots are looking for known threats, people to whom you've issued criminal trespass warnings, terminated employees, or domestic abusers. So how easy is that to add whatever you want? Put a comma there and add the next thing. White supremacist. Well, they're bad people. Sure, we'll add that. Anyway, I'm not fear-mongering. I'm just talking. So there it is. Let's leave it at that. It's interesting. It's a weird time we live in. Robots seem to be everywhere. And now Lowe's is just the next one jumping on the robot train. The robot train. That would actually be kind of fun, as long as they don't become sentient and decide to ignore the laws of robotics. So, Gunfighter says it's probably scanning your license plate to get your information to send you ads. Absolutely. That sounds just about exactly what it's probably doing, at least to get started. Letty Lou says license plates will get the organized crime groups, but this is just stupid. Again, correct. And she said, yeah, theft rises because you can't put a hand on the lifters. Best days were when I could tackle someone and cuff them to bring them inside. Yeah, those days are gone, aren't they? Interesting the extent that companies have gotten on. I have no problem with automation. A lot of people say, don't use, self-serve checkouts at Walmart. I don't care. If you stop using a self-serve checkout at Walmart, it's not going to save one job. They're coming, whether you want them to or not. We got to embrace it. This is just another thing. This reminded me of when I was in Walmart a few months ago. Walked in and there's this smiley face robot walking up at me, an autonomous floor sweeper. Interesting, weird, I don't know. Just the reality of the times we live in, and it usually needs to be something we chat about. That's all. One thing you can almost guarantee that you won't find here is me talking about whatever the news story is that everyone else in preparedness is talking about. Because like I said, there's no sense in jumping up and down and saying the sky's falling, but it's kind of fun to take a weird look at that. So that's it for me. That was fun. I hope you guys enjoyed doing that deep dive into the 1977 disaster that was the New York City blackout. If you guys have other great big, it doesn't have to be. And here's the thing. I want them to be kind of regional or a narrow focused disaster that we can kind of do a deep dive into so we can learn some prepping lessons. I love to go back and look at these things. I think, again, what do they say? History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And that's what it is. We can learn lessons from this. I find history infinitely entertaining. I love going back and looking at this. I get excited. I started at like 5:45 this morning putting together the script for this show because I love these history-based episodes. They're a ton of fun. I'm going to try to do a deep dive episode every Thursday. We'll see how it goes, but I really enjoy it. So what do we got coming up this week in the workshop? Well, tomorrow night will be the Last of Us finale, episode 9. Mrs. Cook will be on. That'll be the last show that we do talking about The Last of Us. It's been fun. Not sure if we're going to keep it going or not, but at least we committed to those 9 episodes and we did it. And then Sunday morning, Mrs. Cook is leaving on a jet plane to go to England for 16 days. So I'm going to be a bachelor with 8 Chihuahua babies at home. So that'll be what it is. Saturday night, we'll be live in the workshop. I'm going to be doing an episode called 10 Side Hustles You Can Start Right Now to Make Money. I'm looking forward to that. I love talking about side hustles. And then Sunday evening, I have Russ and Andrea of Snow Farms coming on. If you guys know them, they reached out to me. They filled out the guest form, and I got them lined up to come on. So if you're interested, I'm booked until after I come back from the Living Free in Tennessee Spring Workshop. But if you fill out the form, when I start opening up the guest slots again, you'll be the first one to get a link to go into the calendar and fill out a spot. So, guys, I don't know if I say this often enough, but I hope you realize how much I appreciate you. I love being down here in my office, hopefully inspiring, educating, entertaining everybody, because I don't inspire myself. That's a bad term, but I educate myself and entertain myself every time I do one of these. So thanks for dropping by the workshop, guys. I always appreciate you. Those of you out there that may not realize that this is also an audio podcast, subscribe in your audio catcher. Fountain.fm is probably the best place, but share these episodes, guys. I really appreciate you sharing them. That is what grows the reach of the podcast, and you guys will help me make my goal of making this a self-sustaining business that I can live off of and hopefully educate and inspire. So with that, guys, I appreciate you as always. Stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.